financial institutions that have outdated technology, the struggles related to trade-based money laundering for financial institutions, why we are seeing a shift towards the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in anti-money laundering compliance programs, and how artificial intelligence can be used to reduce false positive alerts and optimize compliance officers' time. Our guest today is Neal Oswald, who is currently the CEO and Senior Vice President at Concentra Bank. Neal has over 30 years of experience in leadership in financial services in the areas of risk management, technology, enterprise operation, and controls. He has worked with large global banks to implement anti-money laundering programs, know your customer, and fraud detection platforms and processes. Neal will be discussing with us today on his perspective on the application and deployment of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques, automation for trade-based machine learning in AML and fraud detection. We often hear trade-based money laundering trending a lot these days, especially during this global pandemic. Before we visit this briefly and discuss with Neal's observations over the last several months, let's review at a high level what trade-based money laundering is all about. Trade-based money laundering is the most sophisticated approach to make black money white by taking advantage of complex trading systems. It generally involves importing and exporting goods and the exploitation of cross-border trades finance. Trade-based money laundering is most prominent in the context where multiple parties and jurisdictions make customer due diligence and AML screening more difficult. Neal, what trends are you seeing these days in trade-based money laundering, and how does it compare to pre-pandemic levels?
We're definitely seeing more and more trade-based money laundering because we're all going more virtual. The volume of trade-based fraudulent transactions or manipulation of transactions to avoid excise or avoid taxes or understate the value of goods is increasing because everything's virtual. It's harder to verify. So that's what we're seeing, is just the volume is up, and we're also seeing, of course, more difficulty detecting and catching the criminals.
That's interesting. And to your last point, in terms of volume is up, is how much would you say of an increase would you estimate have you observed so far?
It's very hard to tell how much, because of course you don't know the good ones from the bad ones, and it's hard to tell. But if you think about how much more of us are on virtual platforms and working virtually now, it's about 70% more people working virtually. So you must have a proportionate increase of fraudulent or suspicious transactions in that population. And that's usually 10 to 15% of transactions are in that category.
Wow, that's humongous. And so at what stage of the money laundering process would you say you usually detect a money laundering scheme, for example?
It's difficult to say at what stage it's happening, because if you think about how anti-money laundering works, you've got various stages of monitoring, various stages of detection. And because you're virtual, those lines are blurring. You're actually blurring the categorization of the transactions. And but I guess at entry, there's more fraudulent behavior at entry because they can enter the system without detection now, because of the way that the transactions are now virtual.
So you said we were answering the process is difficult to detect money laundering, essentially because you can disguise the source of funds of the destination or the money flow. Is that correct?
That's correct. So
okay.
Yeah. So basically, because there's more chances for disguise and more chances for obfuscation, and we're doing more transactions virtually, the volume of trade-based money laundering is going up.
Awesome. And so tell us a bit more about how like other banks, for example, are detecting money laundering activities today, and what would you be yourself, I guess, looking for in an ML solution to dramatically reduce, detection times?
So the basics are pretty basic. You got to actually know your client, and you spend time understanding what your client's business is, who they are, who they do business with, who their typical partners are, what the typical trade patterns are. And by doing that extra customer due diligence, you'll be able to detect if someone is giving you a fraudulent or a suspicious transaction. You also have to broaden your rules so that you look at various data sets and various third-party services to detect suspicious transactions or bad actors, and also set thresholds for detection. Maybe transactions over a certain balance, or maybe a transaction that has got some weird dates in it, or maybe a transaction that's got a new counterparty that you don't know about. And so that should set an alert to give you some basis for investigating the suspicious case.
Very interesting. So there's a lot of variables, if that's what I'm understanding.
Tons of variables. There's many things you can look at. Even things like the normal trade cycles. So it should take a normal cycle for a transaction to complete. But if you have a very short trade cycle, the paperwork went too quick. So that kind of should set off an alert that maybe something wasn't quite done, or maybe it was totally a fraud. So depending on what you look at, but if you have a very what are normal parameters for a transaction, and if it goes outside that normal parameter, you set an alert so you can do more investigation. Or maybe it was totally a fraud.
That's interesting. And what would you qualify or label as a short or long cycle, just out of curiosity?
Well, it depends on the type of transaction. If you're shipping wheat on a big boat, and that takes a long time to move. If you're shipping something on airlines, that takes a shorter duration. So it's a function of who your clients are and the diligence you have in your clients and the type of business those clients do to know what normal and not normal is.
Right, and that goes back to your previous point. If I'm not mistaken, is it comes at the heart of it is customer due diligence and knowing your customer.
Knowing your customer and how their business is conducted to identify something that's not quite right with their business.
And would you say that banks or institutions in general in North America need more work probably in that area of expertise?
Well, banks are pretty sophisticated in this regard. Like they do letters of credit, for instance, right. And they know the credit characteristics of their client. They know who the principals are of the client. They know who the typical trading partners of the client are. But using that data in an intelligent way to detect an abnormal transaction is the most artful form of it, right? Figuring that out and going, this stuff is not right, this stuff is not consistent, there's a pattern here that doesn't match my expectation, then I do some investigation.
Interesting. The challenge for financial institutions typically stems from banks not being able to identify the underlying trades for international transactions, especially non-documented trades. Do you have any additional challenges with these types of trades, Neal?
Well, it comes back to the earlier point about knowing your client and knowing the types of transactions they do. But if you, for instance, have every month someone is doing a repetitive transaction, or every quarter someone's doing a repetitive transaction, that normal pattern is what you look for, because that trade is normal mostly. Except if there's a disruption in trade, like maybe we had during the pandemic, which creates a whole bunch of actually new scenarios, which we hadn't modeled, which might be suspicious or might not be suspicious. So you can see even this pandemic set up for a disruption in trade patterns, a disruption in supply chains, which would cause people to find new suppliers, which would cause people to find new trading partners, which would make it more difficult for a bank to detect if something was fraudulent.
Okay, interesting. And so aside from knowing your clients very well, which we went over lightly, is that we agreed that it's the core of these operations. What else, what other best practices can we share with our audiences for financial institutions to do to best address these challenges? So
there's setting up rules and triggers so that when you interrogate against a known bad actor database, you can use the keyword search, the counterparty identification, and identify that that person is not who they say they are, or that they are suspicious, or they're on a watch list, or they're on a blacklist, so that you can take action appropriately. That's one of the ways. But there's also normal transaction profiles, which is, I said that earlier, but knowing what a normal transaction profile is for the nature of the business is a key modeling technique to identify that something is not normal. That's not a know your customer, that's a know your transaction profile. So if you should have certain evidentiary documents and certain forms and certain customs and bills of trading and excise, and if you don't see that documentation package, or it looks a little bit suspicious or a little bit wonky, that should trigger an investigation as well.
Very interesting. And so a recent Deloitte survey found that the top 4 biggest challenges for financial institutions when it comes to compliance is, in this order, an increase in regulatory expectations, complying with multi-jurisdictional requirements, insufficient technology to manage compliance obligations, and lastly, but still important, too many false positive alerts. Neal, how would you characterize the top challenges for banks today, in your view?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is the volume of work. So if you think about doing case investigation and how long it takes you to investigate a case, and now with people working virtually, you actually have to go find the right person to talk to investigate a case or look at the paperwork. And that work of working the case to do a proper investigation is a lot of work. So that workload, if you get a whole bunch of false positives, you overwhelm the resources of the bank, and they get a big backlog and they get too much work to do. So one of them is the actually volume of work and the false positive, dealing with false positives. The other issue is keeping up with new laws and regulations. So you've got people working around the world and new rules come in about various acts you have to comply with, various rules and regulations you have to comply with. And if you could miss things and get yourself into trouble. So there's even special reporting requirements. There's even filing a suspicious transaction or unusual transaction report. There's certain ways you have to do that, and those rules are changing and evolving. And so keeping up on that is a challenge for some shops. And actually the last one would be actually training people. Because if you don't have a background in what a normal transaction looks like, you won't detect an abnormal transaction. So getting people trained up on what is normal and what to look for and what the red flags are for a very suspicious transaction. If you cannot have people trained up on watching for those red flags, that's where you get your really efficiencies in your staff.
Wow. So in light of this chart, it seems like, in your view, it's a blend of these problems across organizations and financial institutions. Is that correct?
Yes, it's definitely a blend. Like I said earlier, when we talked about what stage of the money laundering process is more critical, this is a continuum of information. And when you use that continuum of information, if you have good information at the start, you're better off. If you have patterns that you can detect in the middle, you're better off. And if you have case management that is automated or working with you to conduct the investigation, you're better off. But how that data flows in the case investigation part of the equation can be very labor intensive and very difficult. And so automating that and managing the case file details is also part of the equation.
Wow. And so since it's all these variables, if you will, are blended into one big problem for financial institutions, I'm wondering, and maybe you could shed some light for our audience today, is there a difference in terms of the priorities of the blend of problems in North America versus Asian or European markets?
I mean, one would like to believe that it's market specific, but I think it's a global market, right? And as you move, trade is still global, even without the pandemic. Trade is still, this type of trade is sometimes dealing with counterparties you don't know personally, and you don't know, never have met. You're maybe buying commodities or ingots of steel or, dates from Turkey, or you're basically buying goods from a supplier or from someone you don't necessarily know. And that's why this trade-based trade letters of credit and finance function exists, is because you're going to basically give up money in exchange for goods, and you don't want to give up the money before you got the goods. So you're basically as the world is still trading, which it is, this is going to continue because we are of course not going to move too far away from being global in our trade.
So Neal, you mentioned that false positives are on the rise earlier, and previously to your answer, I'm wondering, how can you improve the volume of work and the challenge? How can we solve that?
Well, of course, we're going to be talking about AI and machine learning-based detection techniques. And so if you can set up some rules using AI and machine learning, you can actually take the manual volume of work out of the equation and reduce the work. So when people see the demo, they'll get a sense that you can verify certain fields, you can verify against watch lists, you can apply rules against the data sets and reduce the human element and only look at qualified cases in your false positive population. And since false positives are like 80% of the actually detected cases, you can actually reduce the work and only work on the 20% that are more real or more at least or deserve better investigation.
That's amazing. And coming back to one of our findings is a recent survey from Celent, a tier 1 European bank, testified or acknowledged that even after statistical modeling of their false positive rates are over 80%, they are now trying or thinking of using advanced analytics, quote, AI, to manage so many false positives, which implies that banks have tried to throw more bodies to manage the volume of false positives, but the result is exploding costs and high inefficiency. Is that something that you have noticed?
Yeah, you can't just throw bodies at this.
Okay.
Because the scale doesn't work, right? Because the case volume's rising so fast that it's not practical or affordable to just continue to add bodies to investigate the cases. You need to find a better way using technology to reduce the number of cases you actually physically have to investigate.
So that's interesting, as your answer really relates directly to this graph. A Deloitte survey found that the top 5 operational challenges that a bank would face with AML regulations is an increase in manual processes and poor quality of data available. I want to just chime in there very quickly. Is this something that the sentiment you feel of the market accurate in your view?
Yeah, I think data quality is always an issue because even if you're machine reading data off of forms and off of documents, if you don't read that data very well, you'll get the wrong variables, you get the wrong names. Some of these documents are handwritten, and so they're hand filled out anyway. And so being able to read that writing and get the right data into the database is very critical, because then you can interrogate that data for a pattern or a rule. The manual process is just simply the body of work of opening up the case, reading the case, figuring out what the case is telling you, and then figuring out your next course of investigation. If you can have an AI or machine learning bot tell you what is suspicious about the case, you can cut that manual effort down. So this name triggered a watch list investigation, go verify this name. This field looked a little wonky, or the pattern of this trade compared to other patterns doesn't match. Investigate this trade. So if you can have a reason code or a description that allows you to know facts about the case so the investigator can read those facts, you save manual effort, you save time.
Great. So and so to keep on track with that answer, Neal, is what benefit of specifically of AI would you prioritize the most right now? What really hits it on the nail on the head, and why? Out of those 3 on the screen right now.
The head is in the reduction of false positives, so you don't waste your time and resources looking at cases that aren't really suspicious. So the more you can reduce that beginning population to get to true cases of fraud or anti-money laundering, the more productive your workforce will be. And if you can get the alerts that you get that are self-describing what the problem is with the case or what the research condition is in the case, then you'll end up focusing your research effort and reducing your manual effort. So reducing false positives for sure, and then getting the description to match the problem that the algorithm detected or the rule detected or the MI detected, so you can just get reduce your effort.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so to add to that, where do you think banks need to focus the most to improve their AML compliance programs as a whole?
I think customer due diligence and pattern development are the two areas I would spend time on. So getting the pattern of the customer understood and the characteristics of the customer, know your customer really well, and then understanding what they do from a business perspective to identify suspicious patterns in their business. So really knowing your customer well is probably the best defense to detect suspicious transactions.
Wonderful. So to add to that, Neal, to back up what you're saying is that a Deloitte survey actually found this interesting in their survey for the next 2 years of improvement is that customer due diligence and control measures really need to be improved on, or management in financial institutions really want to improve in those two areas, congruent with what you're saying right now. So that's a wonderful observation on your end. Do you have anything else to add on to your note on this?
Well, just to broaden out on their control effectiveness. So you have certain controls or thresholds on what is a deviation. And so making sure you understand and design those rules for detection, or the rules for thresholds, or rules for pattern recognition. That control effectiveness bucket carries a lot of content in it. It's not just a control like a tick box. It's a control in the way you look at the case and then you look at the pattern. It's not just a control. It's a detection technique, as not just a control. As I read their survey without knowing exactly what it said.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that concludes our topic, subtopic 1 of the day. We're going to move to subtopic 2. The COVID-19 pandemic presents an opportunity for criminals to commit extraordinary amounts of financial crime and naturally increases the risk of money laundering. In fact, fraudulent transactions in the US were up 35% in April 2020 alone, according to the Banking Journal. COVID-19 has elevated the awareness amongst financial institutions that they must adapt their policies and their responses to changing consumer behavior in the wake of COVID-19. Financial institutions will face increased hurdles in their operational efficiency to identify and track illicit activity. This is accentuated as remote work has become widely popular amongst financial institutions due to COVID-19. Luckily, there seems to be recognition that financial crime compliance initiatives can provide broader benefits to the business. In fact, an associate at Palmera Consulting recently answered a survey where we quote, financial institutions are being forced to reevaluate their risk-based approaches to AML, the ways their people and systems are deployed as they work to address the greatest financial crime threats in the face of this pandemic. So Neal, we touched on this in our first segment, but right now I really would like to focus on the COVID situation for our audience. What type of schemes, scams, or money laundering tactics are occurring in the last several months?
Well, because we're all virtual, cyber-related attacks are on the rise for sure, because people are online more and they are not as cybersecurity aware as they probably should be. We've in fact upped our cybersecurity to a monthly cybersecurity training rigor, where we're reminding people about phishing, about CEO spoofing, about email fraud, etc. So we're trying to keep our staff aware, because I think the fraudsters and the attackers and the criminals are all up in their game. The biggest issue is identity theft, because once they get your credentials and your identity, they can hack into your organization, and that's the personal side of it. But if you think about it on a trade-based basis of it, if you had a third party that has legitimate trade interests and someone hacks into them, they can spoof the trade, right? And so they can actually do fraudulent and steal the identity of a regular, normal, legitimate business, and perhaps create some frauds.
Wow. And which one worries you the most?
I think well, personal identity theft, it would probably be the most worrisome, because as people lose their identities, they lose trust in the institutions that support them. They have personal hardship from the frauds that are committed, and it starts to really weigh on society as the organized crime or the criminals start to win. And so I think we should all be very diligent about protecting our personal identity and protecting our personal security online.
That's a great answer, Neal. Thank you. Let's go to slide 17. Let's turn our attention a little bit to the past. Post the 2008 Great Recession, a large number of financial institutions put efforts into connecting siloed information for enterprise-wide views of financial risk. Since then, it seems that banks have been comfortable with the status quo, but COVID really seems to have shaken up those beliefs. Neal, what would you say is the biggest problem with siloed data today?
Well, I mean, most banks are probably not comfortable with their data because they are all working very diligently to connect the various silos. So the biggest issue is that takes a lot of effort. You have to identify common linkages across customer naming conventions, against product codes, against customer profiles. And that science of connecting the data to know your customer, to know their transactions, to know the way they do business takes a lot of work. And that's a lot of work that people are doing, but no bank is taking that lightly. Every bank is taking that very seriously because that's data just to do commercial servicing of a customer or personal retail banking or commercial servicing of a customer. That data is important to the bank from a commercial perspective, not just from a compliance perspective. So connecting that data up, if you get smart about it, you're connecting it up for commercial good business reasons, but also for compliance and risk reasons. And you're taking those silos down because it's in your best interest to do that.
Wow, that's very interesting. So Neal, great. And to that point, to that very interesting answer you just provided us, what do most financial institutions need right now in terms of an innovative technology?
I think spending money on technology, you have to be wise about where you spend your money. Many firms spend their money on the latest application or the latest technology, but they don't think about how they're going to use that application to improve their business. And so when you do spend the money on AI and machine-based learning detection for AML, you do a proof of concept. You prove to yourself that it'll actually lower your false positives. It'll help you handle cases better. It'll improve and reduce your manual work effort. That's a good business case because you don't have to add people. You get less work and you do better detection. So spending money wisely is important, and making sure you know the business outcomes you expect when you spend that money is also important.
Wonderful. And in terms of the areas of where you want to prove that there is an improvement or reduction in cost or efficiency gains, amongst risk assessment, the screening, the monitoring, or case management phases, which process or phase of the AML process is the most challenging for banks right now?
Well, I think if you go back to what we talked about earlier, the risk assessment and screening, if you combine them in your head, you actually have to know the risk of the case you're looking at, and then you have to apply some filtering to put it in the right category and know what you're looking at. So that risk assessment and screening, the triage, separating the wheat from the chaff, the good customers from the bad customers, that is the most important activity, because if you get the filters not working for you, you get too many in the suspicious category that are false, and then you spend all your money and time researching cases that aren't indeed false. So being able to do proper risk assessment, proper screening, and getting down to the right population for investigation to minimize your effort and still do effective detection, that's what you want to do.
Wow. So it seems, to add to your answer right there, Neal, is it seems that banks need the ability to connect data in real time, and they require rapid and collaborative risk management for the current, both for the current pandemic and not for the current pandemic, for the future. But any manual process right now is quote unquote obsolete. Is that correct?
You might still have some manual emails you have to send. But you probably shouldn't be managing your cases manually. You probably shouldn't be using paper file to do your research. The volume's just too high. So you should be thinking about the smart investments you can make that allow you to automate what you do and have technology do some of the more detailed filtering, screening, risk assessments, and then use technology to manage your cases so you don't have as much paper to manage and you have all the data and facts at your fingertips while you do the investigation. So I think being smart about what you spend your money on is pretty important because it'll take the work away.
Absolutely. It seems like it's all productivity play.
It's a productivity, but it's also an improvement in detection. So if I get the rules right and the rules tuned, I'll detect the right, real, true, suspicious transactions and avoid looking at transactions that are false.
So Neal, to add to your point, a recent survey by Celent found that across various jurisdictions and multiple financial institutions, that among 70 chief risk officers that were surveyed, over 50% say that data silos must be addressed, so suggesting and reinforcing to your point that banks are not, or financial institutions right now during the pandemic are not comfortable with silo data. They want to eliminate manual processes as much as possible, but also they want to fine-tune detection. And so this leads us to the next question is, in terms of the compliance analysts, their time, where are they, in your view, spending a lot of their time in terms that can be more productive?
Yeah, so historically, there would have been business rules at the front of the process, triggering red flags, which would have put cases into a queue for research by the compliance analysts. That's like a very classic traditional model, right? And what you're doing with automation these days is you're automating the risk assessment, screening, and classification so you get the population right. And then the case management and automation, the research and the investigation is typically done by the compliance analysts. If you can get the AI and machine learning tool to work really well for you, you can provision to the analyst the reasons that the case is suspicious, the reasons that the case made the queue, and therefore they'll be shortening their effort on investigation. And so you're repurposing your analyst from reading a whole bunch of information to reading a reasoning code or look at this field or investigate this particular piece of data. So you focus their work so they can handle cases much faster and be more productive.
So to your point, Neal, is that data collection, data analysis, and data consolidation and aggregation are all deemed low productivity work in terms of a compliance analyst's time. In fact, some regional bank in the US was quoted saying that their analysts are spending over 80% of the time on routine and highly tedious work. And they're actually looking to automate many of the tasks, not only to improve efficiency, but also to make the lives of analysts easier and raise their productivity. So there seems to be a great need to improve the effectiveness and the return on the effort and money spent within these financial institutions. And so to your point, we're really seeing that across different markets, different regions, and amongst different financial institutions, that compliance analysts' times are being spent on low productivity work, and that there is an immediate need right now to reduce manual processes and optimize efficiency in high productivity work.
Very true. Very true. So if you think about analysts, if you just are analyzing data versus actually investigating the case, or if you're analyzing and assembling the data versus investigating the case, analyzing and assembling the case is a non-value-added activity. Investigating the case is the value-added activity. So focusing the analyst on the value-added activity is very important. Taking that low value-added work away from the analyst and doing it using automation, that's a good outcome.
Right. And to clarify, what would you qualify as value-added work for the analysts? Where would you want them focusing more on?
On investigation and resolution of the case, as opposed to assembling the data or doing data analysis or doing data collection.
Interesting. And why investigation? Is it something that maybe artificial intelligence can't complete for now, or maybe there needs to be human touch?
I think you still, well, AI and machine learning can give you the rules-based pattern recognition reason for the detection of a suspicious transaction, you still probably need a person to make sure, yep, that one's worthy of filing a suspicious transaction report, or no, it's just a data error and we shouldn't file a suspicious transaction report. So you still need somebody probably verifying that the case is worthy of filing an unusual transaction or suspicious transaction report, because you can't just willy-nilly fall them off. Your case management tool can prepare the case for filing a suspicious transaction or an unusual transaction report, but probably needs some human verification to make sure you should, because you don't want to overwhelm your regulator by filing inappropriate reports.
That's correct. That's correct. And aside from operational productivity, Neal, what would you say can be improved for the analysts on the compliance end in terms of bang for buck? So say the financial institutions invested in artificial intelligence and machine learning to fine-tune the detection screening and to reduce these manual processes. What other benefits can we offer analysts or the compliance officers?
Well, if you think about the quality of their workday, if you spent 2/3 of your workday crawling through databases and figuring out relationships, it wouldn't be a very good workday. But if you were presented an array of cases with highlighted fields with known issues that are worthy of investigation, all of a sudden you feel better about the job you do. You are doing more value-added work and you're having a better day. So I think the analysts get an easier day out of it and they get a more productive day out of it, but they also get job satisfaction because they're looking at far cases and they're preventing criminals from doing bad things.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's wonderful. And we hope that for compliance analysts in the future. So to your point, Neal, is that technology is changing. And what's possible now is that programs are becoming now more accurate, effective, and cost efficient with the right technologies. And by right technologies, throughout this discussion, we're really relating to compliance technologies. Is that correct? So in a sense, AI-powered AML compliance solutions or AML programs, backed up by artificial intelligence, are really, fancy jargon for a compliance technology. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, using AI and machine learning in a compliance function is a very smart idea. Okay, doing that means that you're using the patterns of the data, which AI and machine learning are really good at, to mimic the behavior of the analysts and the way they would inspect a case, and short circuit that process because it's happening at the speed of a computer as opposed to someone getting a file. So all of a sudden you have a perfect use case of using AI and machine learning to take the effort out and improve the effectiveness of the function.
So to summarize, false positives are demonstrably costly. However, false negatives, where AML systems fail to spot actual suspicious cases, may carry higher risk and be hard to quantify. As criminals become smarter, the ability to quickly identify new and previously unknown patterns will be paramount in anti-money laundering programs. Advanced analytics, such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, offers opportunities for real improvement and efficiency gains in AML. These technologies, quote unquote, these compliance technologies, support human decision making and do not replace them. They help in pattern identification. They provide scenario identification, reduce false positives, and deliver better insights. They lower the cost of compliance's opportunity costs and the time, and they identify areas for additional research and reduce human errors. As we've seen, AI offers a relatively cost-effective opportunity to upgrade your defenses when it's most needed. It boosts compliance analysts' productivity, mitigates any disruption related to COVID-19, improves job satisfaction and quality of life within financial institutions, and many more benefits. Today, we want to introduce you to CompliData. CompliData was founded in 2018. It developed an AI platform with various intelligent agents that help in effectively automating and optimizing the AML and KYC compliance processes. The team at CompliData, the founding members, pioneered the first AML implementation in Europe. They've participated in 100 different projects in over 20 years. Amongst the many recognitions Compudata has achieved, it has won the Startup of the Year as Best AI Startup in Belgium and was ranked as a top 10 rising startup in Deloitte Fast 50 Belgium. The solution, the Compudata solution, is an all-in-one AML compliance solution, which offers trade finance, corporate KYC, alert risk ranking, and sanction screening. Compudata is an industry solution which supports actors in the trade finance domain to attain regulatory compliance through computer vision, artificial intelligence, alert, and case management and reporting. The first step is to parse and extract data from SWIFT documents. Here, all documents have been processed. All we have to do is start a new upload by clicking the upload button on the sidebar to the left. Or its uploads through network drives, APIs, and via user interface as shown in this case. Now that we have successfully uploaded our files, we can view them on the left. The first step is parsing. Let's go. Data is extracted through parsing can be verified in this step. You can see the code, the label, as well as the value metric. Simply search in the search box the description of the label, and you can find its value metrics. Thanks to this unique AI-driven approach that will automatically structure the data with proper labeling, which will further help in automating the name entity recognition. Second step, labeling. Let's go. Here we see the result of auto labeling. You have different labels for the various contents, such as international, trade, corporation, development, and so forth. You could also go through the organization. The colors correspond to data for different data types on the left, as seen. You can look for zip postal codes, the country. Data labeling can also be modified by selecting the data point, followed by clicking on the label of choice on the left. Data can be verified here on the right in the live preview. If required, manual changes can also be made. Now that the information is properly categorized, it can be used for automating the screening in the next step. This categorized data can be used to insert into the back office systems to screen against relevant watch lists. Moving on to step 3, screening. Over here, you have the information that is screened under the label section. On the label, you have number of checks, you have number of hits, and also the risk level as designated by colors. Clicking a label provides alert details. You have the type, the list used for the screening, the risk level, and the availability to create an alert flag. Clicking alert displays the details here on the right under entity details. You can see a person's name, the organization, the street address, different names under the watch list. For dual use goods, we screen entire free text to detect potential issues. Again, to the right, you can see more details on the screen entity and as well as any relevant watch list entity. For the beneficiary part, we can see the type of organization. So is it a sanctioned person, a special interest person, a terrorism person, or a politically exposed person? We can look at the list of where they rank in terms of if it's Dow Jones, if it's just a world check, or if it's Lloyd lists and internal intelligence, and see the associated risk and the alert details. Finished. Great, so Neal, based on your observations of the Compudata demo solution we just provided to our audience, how do you believe the Compudata solution that's powered by machine learning and artificial intelligence can improve financial institutions in terms of detection, in terms of reducing or eliminating nearly all manual or repetitive tasks. What are your thoughts on this solution?
Well, the reason I liked what I saw was because it was basically taking documents in their native form and taking information out of those documents, and then using that information to interrogate the information in those documents to then find patterns and detect unusual or suspicious transactions. What I also found interesting about it is the operational efficiency is if it read the data incorrectly, which was rare in the case, but you could actually on the edit the field to get the data to be right. So if you think about the processing efficiency that introduces in the capture of trade data and trade documents, it's huge. And then if you have that data at your fingertips, and then you can put some algorithms behind the scenes to identify the patterns and identify the normal behavior and relate it to customer red flag triggers or customer behavior, all of a sudden you've got some great capabilities to detect unusual and suspicious transactions. And that's why I liked it.
Wonderful. Neal, thank you so much for your participation, and I'm sure our viewers really enjoyed our conversation together today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Great.